So this is basically the program I use for every poker question I have, basically. I have a lot of different open here. So it starts off, this is just a very simple one for heads up 101. You start off with like what hands to play pre-flop, for example. And the solver here tells me to raise 78% of hands, call 12%, and then fold the last 10%.
Yeah, and obviously these numbers would look pretty different if it was a 6-player game compared to heads up.
Yeah. So, and then once you learn all of this, it takes some time to memorize, but usually when like you only need
you know like every single hand you're supposed to.
Well, there's so many combinations that you like look for patterns instead of, for example, like you can categorize like your hand into pairs, for example, and you can type in 10-10. You can learn how to play 10-10. It's basically said the very worst ones you can limp. You fold the ones with 3 10s in them, and then you play the rest. It's pretty simple. You can categorize that like every hand almost.
Okay.
And then when you decide to play your hand, it's time for out of position to find out what to do against my open, for example. And here it tells him to fold 24%, call 60%, and raise 16%.
Okay, so you also see what the opposition should be doing.
Yeah. And once he responds to this, for example, by a raise, he gets back to me, and it tells me what to do with my hands again. And this goes back and forth. Do
you then have a way to make sure that you are doing this like 86% of the time and doing that?
Yeah, I have statistics on my play, so I can see this in my database. What I do. Usually, I'm like off by like 1%.
Okay, and that's pretty accurate.
Yeah, and sometimes I adjust. Like if I'm playing someone that I think is really bad, I would adjust some of my ranges. For example, whenever I play that he. Like if he 3-bets, for example, like 25% instead of 16 like he should, I'm gonna remove some of these hands from my raising range and add them to my limping range.
Okay.
So that it doesn't cost me too much whenever he like 3-bets me and makes it expensive.
Yeah, because you can see the flop cheaper.
Yeah. So I had a situation because I have one board up running.
Okay.
So basically, I have a situation here somewhere. So I raise my opponent 3-bets to 450. I can then look at my play. Oh, it disappeared. But I can, for example, type in my hand Ace Jack 9 3, and it says if you have 4 of a suit or some of the worst jack of a suit, you can limp. The rest should be raising. So I raise, my opponent raises back, and it tells me here that I should be calling.
Yeah.
And if I have no suits at all, I should fold. Back to the hand, that's what I do. He now checks to me. And I wouldn't say that this is a big, like it's not a really tough situation because it's kind of obvious what I should do. But this is not what I found interesting about the hand. It comes later.
Okay. In this situation, you should be betting.
Yeah. There is some occasional checks with this hand, I believe, but like at least 80% of the time you should be betting. What's a bit interesting about this situation is that out of position should be betting a lot because this board favors him by far. So when he then checks, it can be a bit tricky to play this situation because knowing what to bet and not is
Okay.
It's a situation you don't come into very often because most of the time you're going to face a bet from him.
Why was this a good flop for him?
So it's just because of he has the top 16% of hands. I have so I play 80% raise pre-flop, and I 4-bet 6% of the best ones, and I fold some of the worst ones. So I end up having like my range is like 70%, which with a lot of mediocre stuff, and he just has like 16% of the very best hands.
Okay.
So all in all, this is just a massive flop for him.
That one knows because of the betting pattern pre-flop?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't have the exact same flop here, but I have the Queen 8-4. We can see, for example, what his strategy is after raising pre-flop, and you can see here that he should be, in fact, betting 80% of his hands for a 50% sizing.
50% of the pot?
Yeah. So you can, for example, type in like, what should he do here if he has pocket queens? It says then you should bet 80% of your queens. And then you can, for example, see what if I have queen with hearts, and the check is dropping or increasing a little bit. And that's just because of queens with hearts. It's just such a strong hand that you want to use it as a trap, kind of. So then action is back to me. Should be checking 55% and betting 45. I can now type in my hand. I had like ace heart. So you can still see that even if I type in my hand, there's so many different hands, which is basically the same hand class, just with like different stuff to it.
Yeah.
So you can see that I should be betting my hand 90%, and just like some occasional checks that doesn't really exist. It's just like the computer likes it. But for us humans, this is, or for me at least, this is 100% bet. Because you can't like memorize this well. Like you can't know that you should be checking 10% of this. So you kind of simplify it in a way and just make it 100%. So I do bet.
As in, like, the opposition can't know that there is an 11% chance you're going to check here?
Well, because it doesn't really matter too much. It's very like, yes, you can. If you bet all of these and you don't check it, you don't really lose much money doing it. Because this is just like one out of, like, this is not even 0.1% of your range, this hand. So it doesn't matter as long as you get like if this hand was for example a check and I bet it, that could have been very costly. But when it says like 90% bet, you don't lose much checking or not checking at all.
Okay.
So the hand continues. I bet and he calls. He checks to me, and here I had a very interesting decision.
Okay.
I wasn't sure if my hand fit into like fit into a bet or not, because it felt a bit marginal to me.
Fit in as in the way you've been betting so far, you are showing that you have something? Or
so yeah,
telling him that it's likely that you hit something.
Yeah, I have like in my range, this turn is pretty good for me, but he still has more like overpair types of hands, and I have, for example, more 5x, but I also have just more bad hands than he has.
Yeah. What about the flush draw? Are you considering that you're sitting on that?
Yeah. So obviously having the flush draw makes it a better bluff than not having it. because I just have more equity the times he calls.
Yeah.
But I just wasn't sure if this was a hand I wanted to put into this betting range, just because when I check it back, I still have a lot of equity in the hand. And there is, for example, a situation where I bet and I face a raise, and I believe it's very marginal whether I need to call or not. So I figured I would instead of choosing a kind of a middling hand to bet, that I would be more kind of either have a very clear bluff or have a very clear value bet, and kind of check this middling hand. Especially because after I bet, there's not a ton of rivers I can bluff with this hand, because it doesn't really, like a 6 or a 7 or a 9 or a jack makes okay bluffs, but I'm not super thrilled with it. So I decided to check with the software.
And you're thinking about all of these things while like the hand is being played out.
And a lot of it is automatic, just because
you've been playing a lot.
Yeah. So can go back to so this is after he has check call, and he never gets to bet this turn. So I forced him to check. And here we have my strategy versus his check. So you can see that the most used size for me is 50%, but I also have some 100% pot bets.
And it's pretty close between all of it.
Yeah, so this is a very technical turn, I would say, when it's like not very clear like what you should do with your range. And this just takes, it's maybe like a 15-minute job to memorize all of these hands in a way that I can implement it for the next time. But just for simplicity now, I'm just gonna type in like my hand and see if I can find some common patterns. So I had ace jack with heart. So it's not very clear because it's still pretty technical.
Yeah.
The biggest pattern I see is that when you have 3 hearts, it makes a better. It's like it's actually doing some checking too. The 3 hearts benefits from betting because of, first of all, when you bet and get raised, you have a clear decision to fold. Also, when you check back, you have 1 less heart you can hit, so you have just less equity overall. And that's a pretty good reason to bet this hand.
Okay.
When you look at, if you remove the 3 hearts, you can see here that my hand is basically a flip decision. But for some reason, this ace of heart, 3 of heart, which I had almost always checks, where ace of heart, jack of hearts, and the higher hearts likes to bet. Which is, so it's not always a great reason. It's like something the computer knows that we don't. And it takes a bit of time for me to, if I want to figure out why. But it's not super important to me, as long as I know some of it at least. So it seems to be, I can't see some super clear patterns, although it just seems like I should be betting some and checking some. But my hand is just a pure check. In the hand, I ended up checking, and he got checked to me again. And first of all, here I was kind of unsure about what sizing to choose, because this is obviously a clear value bet. So going too small doesn't make much sense, because I'm representing a flush at the minimum. The fact that he's checking is mostly saying that he has some kind of showdown value, maybe like a queen or better. So making it giving him too good of a price doesn't make sense when we have a bluff. Oops.
Is this a bluff?
This is actually a value bet.
Yeah.
So
because you do have the flush, right?
So you can't kind of give him a good price so that we get called just for the reason that we have a value bet. You want to like bet the same amount with your bluffs and your value bets.
Okay.
If not, it would be pretty easy for him to see. So after some thought, I ended up going for the full pot size bet, representing a very strong hand. Some checked back full houses, maybe like queen, 8-5, queen 5. And then for this sizing I chose, maybe the worst hand I could have would be a queen high flush. So I ended up with this sizing, and I was a bit unsure if I get to bet full pot with this hand, or if I should size it down to maybe like $1,200.
Okay.
So I can go back to the hand when it's check. In here we can see his response on this river as played, and you can see that he should be going for a small sizing very often, and he never gets to bet big.
And he should still check the majority of the time. Yeah.
So a lot of the reason for that is when he check calls this flop, he excludes so many of his great hands that he very often doesn't have like too many value bets at all. The hands you can see here is, for example, like ace and some like occasional flushes, but he's so he should be value betting most of his like ace. You can, for example, type in ace. You see that half of them value bets and half of them checks. At least he checks to us, and here we can see what sizings to choose in position here. Still a bit technical. There is some small sizings actually, but the most used size is the full pot, the one I chose.
But why does it say check 64% of the time when you said this is like a clear value bet spot?
Because this doesn't factor in my hand. This is just what I should do with all my hands.
Okay.
Yeah. So when I type in, for example, my hand, it's check 9-3 with ace of heart.
Yeah.
It's basically always betting the full pot. And again, clear pattern. If we have 3 hearts, we like to size it down slightly. But this is something that's too hard to implement in game, because finding like the perfect bluff for the perfect sizing is too hard to be fully balanced. So it's often easier to add a 2 sizing strategy where I have like maybe 1 full pot and then maybe 1 half pot.
Okay.
So I only have 2 sizings to think about instead of 4. So I usually just use the 2 most used sizings, and I kind of remove these.
So 50.5% is what's the most common to bet in pretty much any situation.
No, in this situation.
Okay, in this situation.
So in other situations it can be way different.
Yeah.
So I ended up potting. He should be folding more often than not. In the hand he folded, and that was basically it.
Yeah.
That was just some hand I had running here, so it was a nice one to take. That was a little bit of an introduction into this program, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty cool to see how it's been used.
Yeah.
And obviously, like running simulations and stuff takes some time. So, are you able to do simulations while you are playing, or is that sort of done as an analysis session later?
Well, first of all, you would be able, or you're actually not able to do this in game. First of all, it's not allowed.
Okay.
But to do this, to create this situation again, it takes around 18 hours.
Okay.
For this hand or this board to finish.
Yeah. A lot of processing power needed.
Yeah. So I have 2 servers where I run about 4 of these different boards at a time, and I just have it stored here. So a lot of the hands I'm unsure about, I have it saved already.
Yeah.
So I can, for example, just like look at different boards for different situations, and I have a lot of things.
So it's essentially figuring out which hands you are uncertain about, and then analyzing them, and then you know what to do next time that situation occurs.
For example, like the biggest takeaway was that like it's really like to bet the hand when you have 3 hearts in your hand, and it was a very clear pattern overall, like that when you have 3 hearts, you should be doing something different very often. And I find that in a lot of different situations. For example, that like 3 hearts is a very good bluffing hand, just because it just has less equity than the 2 hearts ones, for example. And you just...
Why is that? Because he has a less chance of having a heart, or is it because... because obviously he doesn't know what you have, right? So.
Yeah. So yeah, first of all, it makes it less likely that he has a heart. So when... well, there's a lot of things actually. When we check back and a heart hits, there's less of a chance that he has a flush himself that we get money from. At the same time, we just have less equity as a check, because that situation is going to happen less often. Because there's one less card that can be a flush on a river. And there's always also less of a chance that he has some kind of flush draw when we have 3 hearts that can continue. So it makes it a better bluff for us, because we have, at the end of the day, we have ace-high. So it just adds up to be a very good bluff candidate. And I see this pattern in a lot of different situations that's similar, or it can be a completely different situation where it's still similar. And that's basically how you memorize in a way.
Okay.
So I obviously don't know like every one of these, because this is like just 100,000s of hands. It's just an endless. This goes on for too long. So learning all of this can definitely look overwhelming, and it is. But you just need to spend like hundreds of hours with it.
Yeah, and then you sort of start to see the patterns. You know what to look for, and then you become more efficient at it as you do it a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes you get in a situation where you're not playing against someone who uses this program also. So you can maybe ask around, and like you need to be more creative when you're playing against a non-computer, or like using this strategy you can never go wrong with it, and it's always going to be profitable, but it's not always going to be the best strategy. Like against a computer, this is the best strategy by far, and it's the only strategy. But against someone that doesn't know what they're actually doing, there is other things you can do that makes you more money. This is just the beginning on how to play. There's endless of things you can do that's also profitable. But at the level online poker is at the moment, this is where you should start at least.
Okay. So which basics would one want to know before one starts running like simulations and stuff?
I think you want to be at a fairly high level.
Yeah.
Because just like looking at all of this just won't get you anywhere. Because like if you can't relate to the situation, I feel like you can't learn it. Yeah,
so you need to play it a lot too.
You want to play it a lot, and you want to have all these questions. So you want to play like thousands of hands, and then you have like so many questions that you wish you knew. So when you actually go into a program, you can relate a lot more, and it's just so much easier to memorize.
Yeah.
When you've been in a situation before where you actually didn't know what to do, and you can get the answer here.